Well, hello, happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have a special guest for us tonight. It's Dr. Kevin. I should have asked you how to say your last name. Hadimi, is that right?
Hamidi.
Hamidi, okay. Super excited to have you on tonight. You have a super unique area that you focus on with your coaching and preventing injuries and rehabbing injuries. And I think that's something that's super valuable to myself, but hopefully to lots of people in the group too. I know we get a lot of questions on how to work around injuries often. So I'm excited to have you with us tonight. So thanks for joining.
Of course, happy to be here. Great. So yeah, like Clarissa, I cannot talk right now. Like Clarissa said, also having trouble speaking. Yes, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. So by trade, what I do is with my clients and coaching clients, both rehab and prevent injuries from occurring in the first place in helping fitness enthusiasts, lifters, gym rats, etc., like get back to performance. So that is my specialty. That's what I do. And I'm super excited to be here and just to talk about ways that all of you guys watching this can prevent injuries in the first place, one, and then two, for anyone that is struggling with a certain nagging area or body part. And if you're watching this on the live or the replay, like feel free to comment stuff down below. I'm in the group as well. So even if you're watching this after the fact, comment stuff down below. I'll be happy to chime back in with any specific advice, but happy to also see if we can help anyone on here with like specific injuries or nagging issues that maybe you're experiencing right now. So we'll kind of have a conversation back and forth and kind of just like talk through all of that. But I guess I'll first start with what is probably more prevalent for most people that are getting into fitness and getting into working out, which is, understanding like how do we actually prevent injuries in the first place? Because I think that's like a common fear or like concern, especially with a lot of people that are just getting into working out. They're just getting into fitness. They are starting to enjoy it maybe, and they're getting consistent on the journey. But, there's always that underlying fear sometimes of like, oh, I want to make sure I don't get hurt. I want to make sure I'm doing things correctly. And maybe you have already run into the trap of getting injured or experiencing some pain in the gym with certain movements and things like that. So I think we can first kind of start the conversation around how do we actually prevent injuries in the first place? What are some important things and considerations to keep in mind? And then we can have probably like a more detailed conversation about some other things. But when it comes to actually like preventing injuries, I like to first start with kind of explaining injuries itself as like an equation, because it helps to kind of illustrate everything else that we'll talk about after that. So when it comes to injuries, like there's really like one equation I like to use that kind of helps to encapsulate the point really of injuries occurs, or injuries are equal to when the load exceeds tissue capacity. So if you think about it, it's the equation of injuries equal when external load is greater than tissue capacity. And breaking that down, all this simply means is external load, meaning how much are you lifting in the gym, how much volume have you done, sets, reps, and weight wise, both in the workout and over time, because that's also very important. We'll get into that in a second. Other stressors, because stress is stress. So life stress, physical stress, financial stressors, relationship stressors, all that kind of adds up on that external like load part. And when that is greater than tissue capacity, so how much can our muscles, tissues, ligaments, tendons, bones, like how much can they actually tolerate and handle at that current point in time? When that exceeds the capacity of our bodies to be able to handle that, that is when breakdown occurs, that is when injury occurs, and that is when pain can occur. So by understanding this equation and by understanding these components, we can kind of piece together with this injury prevention conversation, how do we actually handle these things in the first place, and how do we actually prevent things in the first place? And like the number one piece of advice I have to anyone watching this, if you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to, not get injured in the gym along this journey, or, not experience pain, at least to as little as possible, is that load management piece of the equation with applied load. Meaning, a lot of times I like to say that people get injured simply by doing too much too soon after doing too little for too long. I always like to also joke partially that my busiest time of year in my coaching business is 1 month following New Year's, and it's for a reason. And it's because a lot of people will want to get started on the journey, will want to do a lot really quickly because they've been out of the game for a while. And maybe you're watching this and you're the same way, where like, like I really need to step on my game. So you get into the gym, you start going from 0 to 100 real quick. You're doing all the things, you're trying to do all the work in the gym. And then what you don't account for is we exceed our body's ability to be able to tolerate that by doing too much too soon when our body is not yet capable of handling that amount. I like to use the analogy sometimes of like a cup, if you will, and that cup, like that coffee cup, for example, will represent that tissue capacity side of the equation. So how much our bodies, our tissues can actually handle and sustain and tolerate. When we do too much too soon, or when we ramp up and doing a lot too quickly, whether it's doing a lot of volume, doing a lot of more weight than we probably should be doing, et cetera, when we ramp up too quickly, we start to fill that cup up with, if you think about filling that coffee cup up with like water or coffee or whatever, we start to fill that cup up pretty quickly, more and more. And then you combine other stressors in life and psychologically and everything with that, we end up getting an overflowing cup because we haven't done a lot for a while. So that cup size is pretty small. And then we did a lot too quickly. So we started filling that cup up with too much and we start to overflow. And then that's where pains and injuries start to occur. So then the important thing to keep in mind is, cool, you need to make sure that one, we're doing what we can to not increase what we're doing too quickly. So if you're into working out, if you're in the gym working out consistently right now, making sure one, you're not doing too much too soon, and then two, you're being mindful of how much you're doing and how fast you're progressing by. Because I think it's easy sometimes to get caught into the trap of hitting personal records, feeling good, and wanting to do more and more and more, not taking into account, hey, like our body can only handle so much at one given point of time. And you do it without even realizing. And it kind of just creeps up on you. Like you don't even realize you're running X amount of miles a week until you start getting shin splints and you start having calf pain. And then you wonder why you're hurting. Or you don't realize like your back hurts because potentially you maybe exceeded how much you were deadlifting, like volume and sets wise, without realizing it, because you did an extra few sets every workout just because you felt good. And then all of a sudden now you're like, oh, my low back's cranky, I wonder why. And that might be partially due to that, right? So to recap and kind of center back, the first thing is load management when it comes to injury prevention or mitigating injury is making sure we're not doing too much too soon and managing how much we are doing in the gym. A general guideline I like to give people is like, you shouldn't be increasing how much you're doing in the gym by any more than like 10% every week. This goes for your workouts. This goes for if anyone's a runner in here and just likes to run and do cardio, same principle applies. Don't really generally want to go above like 10%. It's not exact, but it's a good rule of thumb because if we do go above those increases every week, we start to run into issues where, again, the load we're applying on our bodies exceeds our body's capacity to be able to handle that cup overflows, and we start to run into issues. That's number one. The second method or way of like preventing injuries or mitigating that risk in the first place is being consistent on I guess I'll just say, resistance training and mobility training routine in a nutshell together. And what I mean by that specifically is, and this is, the point of being in this group, right, is one, you're getting the consistent help that you probably need with like getting on a consistent workout routine. That's obviously important from what we know from an injury reduction standpoint. Like, hey, if we can get your low back stronger because we're staying consistent on doing hip hinges and squats and things of the like in the gym, the likelihood that you're going to get injured or have pain compared to if you did none of those things is greatly reduced. So it's important that we're also, again, on the tissue capacity side of the equation, building up our body's resilience towards life essentially and doing these tasks, right? So that comes with being on a consistent, not just strength training routine, but something I think a lot of us kind of slack on sometimes, but also mobility routine, because, you know, our body just does not move one dimensionally through like certain planes of motion. There are probably movements that you're neglecting in your day-to-day life that you are not moving your body through that we need to gain exposure to. I always like to say, for example, like, you know, your joints, like your shoulder joint, for example, has all of these ranges of motion that it goes through. And even though we're consistent on a strength training routine, maybe that's great and all, you're working out, but we're only working through certain planes of motion while neglecting other ranges of motion that we don't get exposure to, and that can leave us injury prone down the road if we're kind of neglecting those areas. So being consistent on both a intelligently structured strength training routine and then a mobility routine on top of that, and we can certainly dive into details if we want around that later, but being consistent on that's super important as well for number two when it comes to like reducing a risk of injury and preventing injuries in the first place. And then the third thing that kind of groups a couple things together is also often neglected, I find, especially my world, that doesn't get often talked a lot, but it's like sleep, nutrition, recovery. Those are all super, super important when it comes to actually preventing injuries in the gym or mitigating the risk of those happening. There are several studies I can think of that show like if you get 8 to 9 hours of sleep compared to 5 to 6, like the likelihood that you're getting injured from the less sleep compared to more is by as much as like 85 to 90%. So like it's very important that one, you're sleeping enough on a daily basis. That goes without saying. It's going to improve every other aspect of your life, but specifically with injuries, it's also super important because you're just more likely to get injured if you're chronically like undersleeping, only sleeping 5 to 6 hours. Like get your 7 to 9, that's ideal. 2, nutrition. It's the whole point of why we're in this group to begin with. So the better you can dial in your nutrition, the less likely you are to get injured in the first place due to a variety of reasons we can dive into. And then on top of sleep and nutrition, just recovery in general. Those two obviously link with recovery, but in general, just also, hey, on the days you're not working out, still getting some movement in, taking an active recovery day, just staying active, getting your steps in, even if it's a rest day, just moving your body in whatever way you enjoy, like that's going to help with the recovery process again. And that's all going to lead to just lessening the chance that you're getting injured in the first place. So 3 major things there: load management. Don't do too much too soon after doing too little for too long. Manage how much you're doing week by week. 2, a consistent mobility and strength training routine. And then 3, sleep, nutrition, and recovery. Make sure you have those things dialed in and we can prevent injuries the best we can. I'll kind of stop there if you want to ask anything, Clarissa, before I like talk about anything.
No, that's awesome. And I think it's just interesting how even in the PT world, I mean, everybody knows that sleep and nutrition go long ways. And it's not thought of sometimes by like the average gym goer, like they're just, they function on too little sleep and honestly too much working out. I know we have some chronic exercisers that are like, they hit the gym 6 and 7 days a week. Do you have any words of wisdom for them?
Yeah, I think let me make sure I get this analogy right. Like someone said something to me one day that like really clicked for me in my head, and it was like if you are like, because I used to be there as well, so I can heavily relate to this. And like if you are the type of person where it's like you would rather sleep 5 hours just to make sure you can wake up early to get your morning cardio or workout in for the day. Been there myself. But if that's you, what you're essentially doing is saying like, screw the $100 bill. I'd rather just pick up like a dime or a penny instead. Because like what you're realizing is I would rather like, I don't care how advanced of a lifter or a gym enthusiast or a fitness enthusiast you are. And I've been in the game myself for a while, so I can relate to this too. Like I would rather, if that's you watching this, work out 1 less day a week or even 2 less days a week and get more sleep than trying to work out 6 to 7 and get 5 to 6 hours, because you're actually if we're just talking from a progress standpoint, you're actually reducing your rate of progress, one, to begin with, because recovery is important. We're not building muscle, we're building our physique in the gym anyways. Like, yes, we are, but a lot of those results also come from the rest and muscle repair to begin with, one. And then two, again, if we're not getting quality sleep and enough of it, injury prevention aside, you're not going to be progressing at the rate that you want to in the gym anyways, as far as your lifts and performance is concerned, because credit to Matthew Walker, who's like a sleep expert on this. Listen to his Joe Rogan podcast if you haven't already, but he always likes to say that, sleep and quality and quantity of sleep is the number one legal performance enhancing drug that we have. Like, it literally just improves every aspect of your life. So as far as words of wisdom goes, the best thing that I honestly have to say is, like, you honestly just have to get comfortable realizing that more is not always better, and less many times is more. And it's about quality, not quantity. Like, it's going to improve your results to begin with, just taking a day out so you can sleep more. Because I used to be there too, where I couldn't miss a cardio session in the morning, or I couldn't miss a gym session in the morning. Like, oh, I'm in prep, I have to hit this session. Or even if you're not in prep or doing anything like that, but I could relate to that, being in prep, being an athlete, like all the things. But you realize at the end of the day that you actually get better results by doing less but better, instead of more but subpar. So keep that in mind, and understand that you're not setting yourself back. You're actually setting yourself forward by taking one step back.
Yeah, I agree 100,000%. Yeah. And I'm right there with you. I used to do, oh God, I got like 3 hours of sleep for probably, I don't even know how many years, because I couldn't miss that session. And then I had to weight train, and then and it was just a huge mess. And no, I didn't see the progress that I wanted at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because, like, like you said, it's like it's the non-sexy thing that, like, often just gets neglected, but it's super basic and fundamental, that it's like, I always like to say, like, everyone, I feel like, in our world always wants to go straight to the what things can I add in to, like, recover better and prevent injury? Like, what mobility things can I do? Like, and that's what, when clients come to me, like, that's the first thing they ask me is like, oh, what mobility things can I be doing? What other things can I add in? Like, blah, 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 blah. And then my first point of conversation is, how about we start with, like, what can we take away first that you're doing? Like, are you doing too much in the gym? Do we need to take a day away so you can sleep and recover better? Are you doing too much work and volume in the gym, and maybe we need to taper that back? Again, going back to the equation, like, hey, like, maybe if we just take some sets away and you weren't doing 20 plus sets every single session for every single thing, maybe you'd actually feel better and not always run into chronic injury issues all the time. So that is where the conversation a lot of times for me starts with, like, anyone that comes to me. It's like, hey, what can we actually remove and take away first before we start adding stuff in? Yes, mobility is important. Yes, training is important, but let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's actually start with what is fundamentally important, which is load management, which is recovering properly. And then we can focus on the other side of things of, sure, what mobility practices can we put into play? What things do we need to focus on there? What things do we need to focus on with training, etc. But we can't put the cart before the horse and kind of just rush and throw everything together at once. Like, we can't do that. You got to take a step back and realize, what is actually important, which is what I just talked about, that other side of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
No, I agree. So what happens though when we haven't managed, our stress and our sleep and our recovery and our load, and we do hurt ourselves? Then what?
Yeah, great question. And perfect segue, exactly what I was going to dive into next. So great. So so let's say, hey, we weren't behind the 8 ball with this, screwed up, we didn't follow the advice, you didn't see this live yet, so you ended up already doing a bunch of stuff, and now, like, you are dealing with pain, you're injured. Like, what do we do? What I like to work with, so I have like a 4-phase model essentially that I like to work with my clients when it comes to actually navigating pain and injury, and going from being injured or in pain to performing and not having any pain or injury to begin with. And there's kind of a 4-phase process I walk through. And I think it will help walking through this process real quick because it will kind of break down like how, like for you watching this, like how do you actually deal with it? And then I'll give like a practical takeaway that you can also implement like today. So number one is I like to call like physical restoration, because the first thing, going back to the cup analogy I used earlier, is we have too much crap in our cup. And the first thing we need to do is actually take some water out of the cup. We can't solve the issue until we actually get some stuff out of the cup first, because we're always still going to have an overflowing cup at the end of the day if we don't do that. So the first thing in the first phase I like to take clients through is physical restoration. Let's calm your tissues down. Let's calm your nervous system down, get some stuff out of the cup, optimize it and facilitate an environment for healing, where then we can build upon that with the other phases that I'll go into in a second. That's going to come from, for a lot of people, one, doing certain mobility drills and stretches around, the injured or tight area can just help with just a nervous system regulation standpoint in helping calm down things. Again, diving into what's called a parasympathetic state, where we're helping, one, to kind of calm down our nervous system, rest and digest. Two, we're also helping with alleviating some tension that might be brought on in some of the muscles, joints, tendons, etc., that are kind of inflamed or maybe just a little bit achy. And then two,
Oh, no.
just other, in 99% of the cases, because that's something that most people get told, and I'm honestly not for. Like, I don't think, if you're injured watching this or you're in pain watching this, and maybe you've been told by someone else or some other provider that, hey, like, you should just stop doing the thing and like completely rest and like just don't do anything at all. Probably not the best advice. What you should probably do is still stay as active as possible within reason. So that's going to come from, one, load management. Again, let's look at what you're doing. Let's just modify how much you're doing and then work within what's tolerable. And then three, I like to use some breathing exercises as well with clients, just to help kind of calm down the nervous system again, more so. So like for those that are experiencing back pain, for example, I like to do a lot of like 90-90 position breathing drills, where you're kind of having your hips in like a 90-90 position on the wall, which just means like leg 90 degrees, hip 90 degrees, and you're just kind of sitting against the wall, deep diaphragmatic breathing with your belly, helping to calm everything down. There's a lot of other things, and this is obviously super dependent on what specifically you're injured by or like what specifically your pain is. But the general concept is, hey, we got to calm things down first, while still remaining as active as we can within reason, to then go into our second two phases, which is then what I like to say, we go from restoration to exposure and then potentiation. Exposure being, cool, now that we've calmed things down, we need to build capacity back up. Again, going to the injury equation, we need to solve the tissue capacity side of it, or the tissue tolerance side of it. That's going to come from after we've calmed things down, fix the load management piece of it. We need to then rebuild capacity again. So this comes in phase two, where now, maybe, like, I always like to kind of give the phrase of like, the antidote many times is a lesser dose of the poison. Meaning, if, for example, you felt back pain after doing sets of squats and now you're kind of hurt, you're in pain, a lot of times the answer is not skipping out squats and not doing any of that. The answer is finding a way where we can work back within doing that movement while supplementing with the other things we need to work on. And I'll give a super practical example that, for any of you watching this who are dealing with something currently, take this and run with it. So, when someone comes to me and we then get them into this phase, and sometimes we'll even start them here immediately. And I'll use this squatting example since I just mentioned it. And let's say they're having, whether it's back pain, hip pain, knee pain, doesn't matter. The first thing I'll ask them is, cool, like, is there a load that we can decrease the weight by where you can still do the exact same, for example, low bar squat and not have any pain. Because maybe they only feel pain when they go above 185 pounds, but if we can reduce the load and strip it down to 135 or even 95, and they can go through a whole range of motion in the same position without altering any technique, and they don't have pain, amazing. That's going to be your entry point into loading, combined with the other stuff we'll do, which I'll talk about in a second. If that's not the case, and maybe you're this example that I'm describing, and you can't get through a full squat, for example, without experiencing any pain, the next thing to look at is, can we modify any range of motion to start our entry point into loading? Maybe you get a lot of pain in your low back or your hips or your knees when you sink all the way down to the bottom of the squat. But if we shorten the range of motion and we're only squatting to parallel, or we're adding a box or a high box underneath you, and we limit that range of motion, you can squat pain-free. Amazing. That's going to be where we start. And the whole process after that point is gradually getting you back into full range of motion squatting over time with the other supplemental things we work in. If that's still not the case, and it just hurts the entire way through, the third thing to look at is what most people go to first, I think, but they kind of skip out on these first two, which is, what can we modify? Keeping close and true to the variation that hurt us. So if low bar squats hurt, maybe try a high bar squat where the load is now shifted a bit more axially. We're getting less shearing force on the spine. If you're experiencing back pain, for example, maybe that allows you to squat productively with decreased pain. Maybe that's still not the case, and we need to shift to a front squat or a safety bar squat. Maybe that's still not the case, and we need to shift through a belt squat where we're not getting as much shearing force or axial compression on the spine anymore. You got to just modify away from the variation, but as sticking to as close of it as possible without experiencing more than like a 3 out of 10 pain rating in general. That becomes your entry point into loading. That's where we start to work within to start building tolerance and capacity, because it has to be specific to what deficits we have in the first place. That's one component of it. The other component of it with these two phases is, I like to look at it as mobility, stability, and capacity. Meaning capacity, do we have the strength to be able to strength and tolerance to be able to do the movement, which is what I just talked about, working on those specific movements that maybe are aggravating or we're hurt by, and then also just building a resilience of those tissues or joints that are injured in the first place. So that might just come from other accessory exercises and correctional exercises that can help with just some of the neglected areas maybe that we're just skipping out on when it comes to accessory work and those specific muscle groups, and just helping to improve that local tissue capacity. The other two things, mobility and stability. So mobility, do we have the ability to control that joint through a full range of motion? If we don't, that needs to be addressed because we're leading to other issues down our chain and through other joints of our body. So one, making sure we have the full mobility to handle being in those full ranges of motion with control. And then do we have the stability when we're there to maintain those positions? Those are obviously going to come from having a provider or a professional like screen that stuff out and actually work with you in detail about. But those are the main three components in conjunction with, hey, let's just regress the movement pattern and rebuild capacity there, which takes us through our next two phases of expose and potentiation into our last phase, which I like to just call the sustain phase. We're cool, we've done all the work, we've gone into where we want to be. Let's keep it that way by having good load management principles. Let's keep it that way by not neglecting our mobility, stability, and strength work. We can't ever 100% prevent injury, but we can at least mitigate as best we can the risk of it reoccurring again over and over again. If you're in pain, what do you do? That's kind of the process. And if you are experiencing pain with a certain movement, take that kind of framework I just mentioned with the squat example of just seeing what we can modify the best we can to work within a good starting point, and then just progressing from there over time, again, not too quickly.
That's a lot of information for everyone. I'm hoping they all followed along. We've got a few people watching on Facebook, but no questions so far. So if you are on Facebook and you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We are monitoring that, and we'd be happy to answer anything you guys have for us tonight. So when you're moving through the essential rehab phase, and you have your 4 parts of it, does everyone progress at the same rate?
Yeah. And the answer to that, so the answer to that is no, and it depends, because this is going to depend on a variety of factors. It's going to depend on one, are we dealing with an acute or a chronic injury first? And the way you kind of define that roughly is, one, was the injury recent / within the last 3 to 4 weeks? If it was, we're dealing with something acute. In most scenarios, especially if you get behind the 8 ball quickly with like everything I'm mentioning here, acute injuries will generally not take as long. Like, honestly, like a lot of times, for example, when I work with like acute low back cases, for instance, of someone that just sprained or tweaked their low back, like you can probably get back to where you need to be within another 4 to 6 weeks if you get a handle on it and get behind the 8 ball with it. Like, acute injuries are pretty straightforward in that way. When we don't, and they turn and manifest into something chronic, which we can loosely define as you've been experiencing this for around 12-ish weeks, give or take some or more. At that point, it is turned into what we can define as a chronic condition. And then at that current standpoint, it's going to take longer to get through the phases. So whereas if you acutely experience low back pain, you could probably get from phase 1 to phase 4 within 6 weeks. Chronic bout of low back pain, there's a lot of other factors at play, and it'll probably take us longer, 12 plus, for example, to get there. And it's the same, I guess, analogy that I'll like to link with like weight or fat loss in general, which is like, hey, a lot of people want to like lose fat super quickly, obviously, and like get to their body like this. And it's like, hey, you probably didn't get to where you were in like a day or a week. It was probably like a lifetime of things that kind of led you to where you are. Because of that, understanding, hey, many years led me to where I currently am today. It will probably take some time to reverse all the things that have happened over the past couple of years, and the habits and the lifestyle choices that were made. And it's a similar thing here, where it's like expectations of, hey, you've been experiencing this pain for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months plus. It's not going to get resolved in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks. It's going to take some time, and it's understanding and having those expectations that honestly help with the process itself. Because I like to always say too, with pain, we're not just dealing with the physical, like, yes, that's important, but I like to say pain is a biopsychosocial model, meaning, yes, we have the biology of what physically happened, like what tissues are inflamed or irritated, like we have the physical, but then there's also the psychological. So that's your expectations behind the rehab process, whether you believe this is going to work or not. The psychological of how fearful you are around your pain condition. Like, do you have low back pain and maybe you're afraid to bend over and pick something up in chance that you further injure it? That's a negative relationship around your pain that further catastrophizes and feeds into an increased pain response, which is not good. Those, and then the sociological. So is there other social expectations around your pain that maybe your peers or other people have like said to you? Those all kind of bleed in, because pain is multifactorial in that way, which makes for even more error in us predicting like how long this is going to last sometimes. Because if I have someone who has really good beliefs, they're not fearful around their pain condition, they're not catastrophizing, they haven't been told negative things around their pain, and they're getting behind the 8 ball quickly on this, so it's still acute, they will recover much faster than the same person with the same low back injury who didn't manage their load appropriately at the start, also had these negative fears and expectations around their rehab, are scared or have kinesiophobia, have been told negative things by other doctors, providers, their MRI, other friends, family. that person's going to take much longer to heal and recover from, even if they have the same exact injury, just purely due to those other circumstances. So that is also a big thing that comes into play. And then obviously just the nature of the injury in and of itself and what we're dealing with and like how you got injured in the first place, that will obviously also dictate how long does this last, whether it's tendon, ligament, bone, muscle, etc. Like that'll dictate how long does this last, how long is this process going to be.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's so amazing what the mind can do.
Yeah, people don't realize it, but it's like all all pain is essentially an output from the brain. Not to sit here and say like your pain's made up or it's all in your head, because it's not. It's a real thing. It's just understanding where that's coming from in the first place. And you know, the analogy I like to use sometimes, because I like to always tell people like, just because you're having pain doesn't necessarily mean something is structurally or physically wrong. Like pain does not always equal tissue damage. It can at times, but it doesn't always. Like when I get a lot of low back cases, because that's probably the most common thing that I end up seeing, it's that like 95% of the time, and the research shows this, it's non-specific in nature. Mm-hmm. Meaning we can't mechanically tie it back to something structural. It is just non-specific, which for people hearing that, they're like, oh, what the heck? Like, I want to know like what's wrong, like physically. But then it's good from my eyes, because it's like, cool, like we know that this is going to naturally get better, and there are things we can do to help facilitate the recovery process. And the mind is incredible in that way, because we can have pain but have nothing physically wrong with us. And it's the same analogy I like to give of, you know, pain. Essentially, pain's our alarm system of our body, and it's the same thing as like having a smoke alarm in your house. Like, what does, like, pain's your alarm system. Pain is there as a biological thing to alert you when something's not going wrong. But sometimes it doesn't work according to plan. Same thing as like a smoke alarm in your home. We all probably have had experience with like that faulty smoke alarm in our kitchen, that like we're like cooking something on the stovetop, like nothing's wrong, but then like a little hit of steam hits it, and then all of a sudden like the place just goes off, and then that happens repeatedly, and it's the most annoying thing ever, right? And you have a super sensitive smoke alarm in your house. It's the same thing with our pain alarm system, in that sometimes our pain alarm system can also be highly sensitized or highly sensitive and go off due to the littlest things that probably shouldn't be a threat, but it's just overly sensitive due to a variety of different things. Again, a lot of psychological things can also come into play there. But that's why it's like you can be just going through, you know, for example, if you are scared or fearful of like getting back pain while deadlifting, and maybe you've experienced that in the past, and then you go back to doing deadlifts like a month or two later, that fear response heightens that sensitivity of your body's pain alarm. And then we can get a tweak, even though you didn't damage anything in your spine, nothing's wrong with you, but we're just highly sensitive, and we start to get pain and we get a tweak, and then it's like, oh no. And then we catastrophize, and that cycle kind of repeats itself. And it's understanding that, hey, just because you have pain doesn't mean something's physically wrong all the time. There are things we can do to manage this condition and get back to where you want to be, but understand many cases, like something's not physically wrong with you, we're just overly sensitive, like that's all. And it's a lot of like education around that like I'll also have to deal with like clients and patients that like come my way too, because it's super important to just understand pain in that way. And I find that most people don't have like a true understanding of like what pain is, what does it mean, where does it actually come from. Like we just have these old beliefs tied to it, which is no fault to your own, but it's just realizing, hey, there's like more that plays into this than just like the physical and like you doing something, you know.
Right. No, it's so true. And it's just amazing to me like what your brain is capable of doing. So
yeah it's
definitely to think about. Yeah, awesome. Well, we still have people on Facebook, but still no questions. So I think that you provided a lot of wonderful information tonight. Certainly gives everyone something to think about anyhow. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I'm glad I was able to come in here, and thanks for having me in here and to be able to like, you know, spread all this information out there. That's why we do what we do. Like I want more people to actually understand these things and just stay as healthy and pain-free long term. Because hey, even if you're just in here and you're like, hey, like I'm just focused on getting my body right, or like getting in that shape, the the less we can like delay getting injured. Because I always like to say, it's inevitable, something's going to come up. Like pain's a normal human thing, like it's going to come up at some point, you're going to experience it. It's learning how to navigate these situations and scenarios that will keep you in the game longer, and nothing will take you out of the game quicker than pain episodes or getting injured. And that's the last thing we want to do when it comes to actually making progress with our bodies or in the gym, like long term.
Oh yeah, it's hard to have to, continue to work out around something that you hurt significantly. So
Yeah, it's frustrating.
A challenge for sure. But like you said, it happens. So keeping it from happening for as long as possible is a good plan.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. I'll go ahead and release you. We can wrap things up. But like I said, you're added to the group now, so hopefully if people have questions, you feel free to hop on there. If someone has a direct question for you, where can they reach you at?
Yeah, if you have a direct question for me, since I'm in the group, like just click on my name. I'll be tagged in the live stream here. You can click on my name, send me a friend request, shoot me a message. And happy to kind of chat back and forth. If you have a specific question on like anything I talked about on this live, feel free to just leave a comment below in the comment section and just tag me there, because I'm in the group. Always happy to kind of jam back and forth and like see what we can help with. So if you're watching the live and you have a specific thing that you think of later on, or you're watching this on the replay, just tag me in the comments. Happy to help out. And then if you have a specific question about something you have going on, just reach me on Facebook. You can find my tag here, and then just shoot me a message and we'll be happy to chat.
Okay, well, awesome. Thank you. Super nice of you.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Well, thanks for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night, and we'll have to have you back in a later date.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Thanks,
right. Thank you. You're welcome.